in the back half of this discussion of mystery religions, and I should always point out, they're called mystery religions, but in fact, many of these religions were both mysterious and very public. You think that this is a little hard for us to understand, but mystery religions always have a secret element, something that's secret, something that's unusual about it. Before we begin, I want to also correct something I said last week. Remember, I was talking about Buck Rogers, the famous movie Saturday matinee series. Buck Rogers was a guy who was in the 1930s flying all over the universe and conquering and having this problem. And every 20, each one would last 20 minutes, and then there would be a crisis. Buck Rogers would appear to be killed, and then the next week you'd come and find out that somehow he magically had escaped, and so on. Well, anyway, what happened, for those of you who weren't here last time, is that I was watching one of these Buck Rogers serials on Turner movie channel, and he was standing there talking to one of his colleagues and saying, we have to do this and that to conquer the evil forces. Come on in, John. And so he was talking to this very good-looking young man, and I looked at that man, and I looked at him, and I studied, and I said, oh my God, that's Donald Curtis. And what I said wrong last week was that Donald Curtis, I said he built the whole thing. He bought the land. There was a plantation, Mount Vernon style plantation right here next to it. He bought that. And he had all these phases he's going to build here, this fantastic campus. He only ended up building 2 phases to it, but it's still magnificent. So the point was that a guy who was in lots of movies, a guy who Louis Mayer said would be the next Clark Gable, ended up being a Unity minister, came to Dallas, built an empire, ended up divorcing his wife, and having an affair, and left Dallas, but was amazing for the time he was here. It was amazing. He had a radio program every day at 12 noon, WRR, and he would say, the program was 5 minutes that will change your life. And he did. He could do it. He could talk the talk. He may not have lived it, but he believed it. And so it's because of Donald Curtis, the guy in Buck Rogers, that we're able to stand here today. This was the bookstore he built so that they could sell Donald Curtis books. He put out a lot of books. Who remembers Donald Curtis? Anybody? Oh, John, do you? Sure. And you do, of course, and you do.
Yeah, he was in the house.
Oh, yeah. Well, he was a Dallas phenomenon.
So his wife contributed a lot of funds towards Unity.
His wife named Dorothy. Yeah,
She
Dorothy.
was, I believe, the sixth wife.
She was heir to the fortune of Fikes, the cleaning people that if you go into the restroom, you'll still see, Fikes cleaning supplies and so on. And she bankrolled, I think, the whole thing here. Mm-hmm. But she was a lovely lady, and he was everything that you think of as a movie star. He was tall, good-looking, very articulate, had that presence, and I was lucky enough to get to talk to him many times, and he was engaging. So he was a celebrity, but I didn't want to leave the impression that he hadn't built all of this. He had. He was the driving force behind it. Today we are going to finally, after all the preliminary stuff, talk about specific mystery religions that really impacted. Now, last time I was talking to you about Dionysus. Now, Dionysus, of course, Bacchus in Latin, is the god of wine. And we think of this, that this is his great contribution. He gave it to humankind not to get drunk, but to have health in illness. So when people get sick, they take some wine, make them feel better. And so he's gotten a bad rap. But my point was that the cult of Dionysus was a public thing and a private thing. But it's out of the cult of Dionysus that you have the theater of Dionysus in the beginning of drama, acting, all of it goes back to that mystery religion. The Shakespeare, for example, all the plays, all the tragedies of Shakespeare were based on one of the plays that had been in the Temple of Dionysus in Athens. And some of them, he just takes wholesale, changes up the characters and so on. It's quite important that you understand that. Also, we talked about this god Asclepius. Asclepius is the god of medicine. And it was in his temple that the foundation of Western medicine starts. The man who went to study at the Asclepius was Hippocrates, and he laid down the principles of medicine. And to this day, doctors still take the Hippocratic Oath, right? Granted, it's greatly modified and sanitized, you might say. But so the point is, these mystery religions, rather than being something way back there that had no impact on our lives, had a huge impact. And this is just one particular mystery religion. Here is Dionysus. Now, I want you to study this. If somebody just walked up to you and says, male or female, you'd probably say female, right? The lips, the composure, right? Dionysus was very much the idea of femininity coming out in a man. Very strong. And now let's see how we're going to do this. Carolyn has really helped me a lot trying to get this thing going, and I'm going to do my best if I can ever find the... does anybody see where the arrow went?
No, just roll up I think.
Okay, roll the thing and see if that works. If that changes that. There it is, I see it now. Let me see if I can do it. There we go. All right. Come on. There. Now, this is Dionysus also. Now, if you just looked at the head up, from the head up, male or female? Female. See? Now, I told you this, but every god and goddess had a staff. In other words, if you're a god, that's how they knew they were gods, if they would have a staff. This is a staff called a thyrsus. Thyrsus. So Dionysus, thyrsus. Nobody's ever heard of thyrsus. Thyrsus is a staff that has a pine cone on top. Now, why pine cone?
Pineal gland. Pineal gland.
Say that again.
The pineal gland is named because it looks like a pine cone. And when we're fully spiritual, that pine cone is wide open.
Thank you. So it's in full bloom, so to speak, yes. Mm-hmm. And so when you see a pine cone, you think Dionysus, but we are also going to see the pine cone very strongly in another mystery religion, the Great Mother Religion. Now, note here a couple of things. First of all, opened up all the way down here to expose the penis so that you are not going to confuse this and say, oh, this is a goddess. No, this is a god. This is a man. And you see he's holding some kind of cup, and there's a vase over here that's pouring wine in. Now, all he has to do is say, pour the wine, right? In other words, he has the power of a God over inanimate objects. And there's some other symbols here. Here's an animal down here. But Dionysus is very simpatico, you might say, very empathetic with humans and very much wanting to help humans, although this very same God could also be brutal. If you want to read the great tragedy about Dionysus, it's quite revealing that if you were unfaithful to him, he would be brutal back. So it's the idea of those gods, you have to propitiate those gods. Those gods aren't just generous in general, they're generous, but they expect generosity back. Does it make sense? It's this idea of obligation. Whereas I think in Christianity, in the West, the idea of God being always a blessing, always kind, always caring, even though we don't care for God. That's not the ancient point of view. The ancient point of view is you have to propitiate the God, okay? I'm going to, I had it here, you see that? Somewhere in this, there it is. You know, where does it go to is what I want to know. I'm going to skip this. This is Dionysus at an older age, but still has very sympathetic quality. I want to talk about these people.
I think it's getting away from you.
Oops, sorry. Okay. Now, let's see if I just leave it, right? These are called maenads. Maenads, this is the Greek, the Latin would be Bacchae, or maybe Bacchae. These are women that are fanatically devoted to Dionysus. And what they're doing here is they are carrying a torch, which tells you it's nighttime. So these mystical and mysterious events, by the way, those two words are connected, mystical, mysterious, and mystery. They're taking this bull to the sacrifice. And they're going to sacrifice the bull. These women will. And they will, according, again, to the play, which, by the way, you don't know if the playwright is maybe putting Dionysus down. Unlikely, though, because this play is shown in the Festival of Dionysus. But my point is that this wouldn't seem unusual to them because they would understand from the beginning, you have to propitiate a God. You have to give to the God and be generous with the God. So these maenads are taking this bull and they will literally tear the bull apart. Now the bull shows up in, again, these mystery religions, the sacrificial killing of the bull. You're going to really see this when we get to Mithraism next week. And you'll see the clear line from these rituals, killing of the bull, down to the present day bullfighting. If you've ever been to a bull ring, for the bullfight, you notice how very religious it is and how ritualistic it is. And they have to go through all these forms. These men have to wear these impeccable outfits and so on. And they have to kind of give this great reverence, and they're very highly serious about it. This is the remnant of these ancient bull sacrifices. What are they going for? The blood. So here's a word that is so important that hardly anybody ever uses anymore, or they use it in the wrong way, and that is the word libation. A libation is a liquid. Typically, it can also be other things, but it's typically wine, olive oil, It could be cornmeal, wheat, not corn, wheat meal. It can be something of value that you just simply put into the earth and destroy it, or as it were offered to the earth, right? But the most important is blood. It's what they call in the ancient world, in the Greek and Roman world, they had four elements or essences. The fifth element, quintessence. Quin means the fifth essence or element, and that is, are you ready? Female blood, feminine blood, that's tied up with reproduction. That's the quintessence. Now the bull's blood then is, just like in the temple in Jerusalem, they sacrifice all these animals. To do what? Not so much to kill the animal as to get the blood. And the blood was then poured onto the earth, and that was the libation for the sins of the people. Well, same here. Same here. It's always the same thing. Now, we're going to go look at one more here. This, I think, you'll finally start to see the point of all of this. This lady right here. This lady, you can see, is in a state of ecstasy. She is drunk. Now, drunkenness was very rare in the ancient world for a very simple reason. Wine is enormously expensive. They only had so much, and they had to last them from one grape crop to the next, right? And so what they did is they water it down. So they talk about, oh, the Italians always had wine, or the Romans always had wine with meals. Well, yes and no. They had wine, but it was so watered down, it might as well have been Kool-Aid, right? But they would have a bowl, and everybody would put in their bread. By the way, we have preserved bread, so we don't know so much about how day-old bread just turns like a rock, right? So what people would do is, this is before cups and glasses, they would have a bowl, watered down wine, they'd put in the piece of bread, suck up some of this, and then eat it and drink it, as it were, together, right? Well, the word, the original word for dried out bread, are you ready? Toast. So they would all do this together because they would get in a circle and they would all do it together because the idea was mutual trust, because the way to kill people in the old days was poison. But they had no way of tracing it. So if everybody went in together, that means we all bonded, we all care about each other. And so they would all do it together at one time, put it in their mouths, and that was a toast. Well, when glasses came along, they gave up on the bread, and they would each have a glass, and then let's have a toast, right? The word survives. The concept is gone, but the word survives. So we still have toast. And we'll clink our glasses together, whatever you're drinking. This lady is holding a vase about as hard as she can hold it, and you see little grape leaves on this, tells you it's wine. Now, in this case, this is not watered down. This is wine that she has taken in great quantity on purpose to go into a hyper state of drunkenness and start hallucinating and come into the presence of her God. To be in one with the God in the state of inebriation. Which is a funny connection, because this word libation nowadays is only used in one context. Somebody will say, how was the Christmas party? Well, it wasn't too good until they brought the libation. And you think, they brought some booze, right? Or that wedding was kind of dull, but then I had some of the punch. It was a real libation. See? This idea that the word, again, survives, but the word takes on new meaning through time. Okay? And that's the word toast is taken on. So Edison, one of the very first inventions he made, you can see it in the Smithsonian Museum of Science and History, was a toaster. So you take perfectly good bread and you make it old. You know, old and crusty, right? And then it pops up and you dip it in your coffee and make it soft again. But think about the logic, right? I mean, this is the craziness of it. And everybody's just wild about that. And I'm one of the very few people left on the earth that still has to dip the bread. If I have bread, if I have a donut, if I have anything that's even close to being bread-like or cornbread or anything, I've got to dip in coffee. You heard of Dunkin' Donuts? Even at Dunkin' Donuts, they don't dunk. Nobody dunks anymore, except me. For me, it just is the natural way. Okay, so here is the high point of this religion, was to get into harmony with this. Now, last week, I left you with a cliffhanger, and this cliffhanger was an experience I had in all places of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican in Rome a few years ago. So I was very excited, you know, to see the Sistine Chapel, and I had my little guidebook and everything. And I'm looking, you know, they don't give you a lot of time, and there's about 1,000 people in there, and it's, of course, you got to look way up to see things, but still, it was an exhilarating experience. For one thing, they had refinished the Sistine Chapel, or made it, you know, bright like it was when it was new, and that was fun to see. But to be in the presence of the work of Michelangelo, so much of his work. So I'm looking, and I see this one lady sitting there holding something, and she's just like huge, right? And I'm thinking, whoa, who is that? So I'm going to show you a slide of what I saw, okay? Again, please be patient with me. There it is. I'm moving. I'm doing the best I can, Carolyn. Okay, now Carolyn, we've got to make...
Now do that wheel.
Do the wheel. Where is the wheel?
On your cursor, on the...
Oh, on this.
Your mouse.
Okay. To go over here and then...
There you go.
There we go. This is what I saw. And I thought, who in the world is that? By the way, do you recognize who these, before we get to her, do you recognize what these, you know what they are called in our...
Romulus and Remus.
Well, that was a good guess. Could be, but in art they're called putti. Putti.
Oh.
Now, you can go with me today into Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church. You go with me, Dallas Museum of Art. If there's a painting of the Virgin Mary, I will write you a check that you're going to find putti. What are putti? Putti are little angelic characters, hard to find a word for them, who are angels that are there helping and protecting and taking care of the Virgin Mary, right? Well, here you have putti helping this lady. So I look in my little guidebook. Who is this? Here's what it says. I'll write this so hopefully you won't have trouble seeing it, okay? This is the Sybil of Cumae. Cumae is a place south of Rome, near Naples. There's a cave. And in the cave was this Sybil. Now, what is a Sybil? A Sybil is a woman well known for her ability to explain the future, explain difficult situations, predict what's going to happen. And this particularly Sybil was famous for people would come and ask her questions, and she would not answer verbally. She would take out, had some some ink and a pen, and would pick up leaves off the ground and write down something, and then read it and then throw it down. And people would scurry and pick it up. But she did this all the time. She did it if anybody was there or not. She'd just write all these things down. So people would gather these together and put them all in what would be like for us a scrapbook, right? These are called the Sibylline. I did this wrong, didn't I? Books. So this is, anyway, Sibylline books. Now, you have perhaps heard that the Romans had no Holy Scripture. You may have heard it. This isn't quite true. They did have the Sibylline books, the collection of all of these leaves that they found on the floor. And these Sibylline books were so important, they were put on the highest hill in Rome. Remember Rome, 7 hills? And the highest hill is called Capitoline Hill. And you have the Temple of Jupiter, their most important god. And in this Capitoline Hill, in the Temple of Jupiter, they kept the Sibylline books. And this is what they read and consulted. Just like people would read and study the Bible to find out things to study and try to figure out the future. People are still doing that to this day, right? That they're trying to find the hidden meaning in the Bible, right? Same with the Sibylline books. By the way, why is the tallest hill in Washington, D.C. called the shortened version of this Capitol Hill? Well, because we have copied in every way we can possibly think of the Roman Republic, right? So if you go to Washington, D.C., all the original buildings, even into the 1930s, were Roman temples, right?
Yeah.
Take your pick. Supreme Court, Roman temple. The Capitol itself, the Pantheon, the Treasury, classic Parthenon building, right? And you go up and down. Even the White House itself is kind of a little faux Roman temple, right? Well, anyway, back to the picture here. So I'm looking at that, and I look at my book and it says, the Sybil of Cumae. What in the world is she doing here? So that took me off on a search later. And I found out there are several of these Sibyls in the paintings of Michelangelo because St. Augustine, down to Martin Luther, and many in between, believed that the Sibyls had foretold the coming of Jesus. And therefore, they're worthy of our adoration and appreciation, right? And that's something. Okay. Now, let's see if I can.
Can I ask a question?
Of course, that's what we're here for.
Why is she so masculine looking?
Yeah. And you have really, and you can really see it here, right?
Yes, and her muscles.
Yeah, her muscle, her body, and all of this. Yeah.
Well,
I have-
Michelangelo liked the physical form.
Yeah.
And he would go out and
Yeah.
get the laborers as his
He
models.
he's modeled somebody here, but the point being, why? You know, why do you make her feminine looking? The answer, I think, has to do with the Romans' view of divinity. You'll notice there are male deities, female deities, and then there's several deities that are both. male and female, Dionysus being a supreme example of this, you see. And so I think it was the idea that they're women, but they have the sort of masculine quality of being independent, and they're going to do what they're going to do, and people can ignore them or not. I mean, it's just this kind of aggressiveness, right? Although now let's look at a couple of these famous Sybil's. And these are in the Sistine Chapel. See if we can get this one to go up. This is the famous Sybil at Delphi. Delphi is in Greek, their most important place of prophecy and oracle. And she would sit on her little tripod, and people would come and ask her a question, and she would say something. In that case, somebody would write it down and interpret what she said. Now, she looks young, right? And the idea was that she's called the Pythia, from the word python. Remember we talked about last time the incubation where they have all the snakes and everything? So she is the Pythia. In other words, she's literally the snake woman. Yes, go ahead.
So did Michelangelo paint that?
Yes. Yeah, he designed it. The actual coloring is done by his students and that kind of thing. But he spent a lot of time in the Sistine Chapel. And if you've ever seen the movie about Michelangelo and the Pope, you know, it was an endless struggle. This is another one called the Eritrean Sybil. And she's much more feminine, but she's also very serious, right? And you see the putti again, always cavorting around, which tells you that these Sibyls were seen as goddesses, mother goddesses. This is such an important detail. All right, now we are going to get to the mother lode of tonight's presentation on mysteries. We're going to talk about the cult of the Great Mother. And I want to tell you, some of this is so unbelievable. It's going to be hard for you to really accept everything that I tell you. All right? Now, the Great Mother religion, they called her Mater, Latin, Deum, Magnum. Mother, God, greatest. Remember, a magnum is the largest of something, right? Like if you get a magnum of wine, it's a pretty big bottle, right? So she was M, the shorthand is MDM, and you'll see this written in Latin all the time, MDM. So there's MDM, and I'm going to tell you her story, remembering that there's a number of versions of this. One of the problems in religion is there are so many legends associated with each story. You can almost have to take your pick, right? But in her case, the story goes like this. She was a princess, and she was out walking one day, and over in the bulrushes along the river, she heard a baby's cry. Sound familiar? So she goes over and finds this in the basket, finds this little baby boy, and she takes this baby home, and she raises this boy. Now, here we have a situation, a mother and son, although she is not actually his blood mother. That's an important detail to remember, as you'll find out. She named the boy Attis. So it's Cybele and Attis. I'm sure you've heard of the Oedipus complex. Big time. So they're a team, they're an item, they're always together. grows up, he's very much protective of his mother. And his mother, though, comes from royalty. And there's nothing you've got to remember in the ancient world. Royalty and divinity are the same thing, right? So she's born in a royal family, but she's considered divine. And she has divine power. So Sybil raises him, and they're just as close can be. By the way, here she is sitting on her throne, and with her lions. Lions are her, what do you call them? When you have animal that's with the football team, mascot. Yeah, they're kind of the mascot. Anyway, she has this hat which represents the horn of plenty. She's very generous. She's very beautiful. She's very stunning, right? By the way, where is this theme picked up in American iconology? Where in Washington, D.C. are you going to see something like this?
The Lincoln?
That's exactly correct. Lincoln, of course, is in a Roman temple, and he's sitting on a throne, and he has his hand extended up. A man named French, did the, but he's playing off this, right? Just like the Statue of Liberty is the god Hera, right? In Roman terms known as Juno. So when Bartholdi did the Statue of Liberty, he had as his model the goddess Juno, right? And so it added a few things to it, like the rays coming out of her hat and so forth. But so anyway, everything's fine until he gets to be about 18, 20 years old. So let me show you him as a boy. This is an eye-opener, as you will see. Hello, Paul, come on in. That's just showing her hat. Okay, here's the boy Addis. Now, lost it. What do I do? I'm just like this. Okay. Now, they go to all the trouble to open the boy up. So you'll be sure to see that he's a boy. I mean, they had no problem with nudity, the Romans. In fact, all those games they played, wrestling, all in the nudity for the man. I don't know if the women did too many games, but for those of you in fashion, this is what's interesting here. You see here, you can't see it very well from where you are, but button. You have all these buttons. What's it all about? It looks like a onesie, for a kid, right? But they didn't have zippers, so they put in buttons. Well, the fact of the matter is, this goes so far back, nobody had conceived yet of the idea of a pant, where we just put it through. The idea was that they couldn't figure out how to do this, so they did the fabric, did these buttons and buttoned them up, right? And pants being worn by males, adult males, does not actually come into Western civilization till about 1800. Here's a trivia question you might see in American history class. What American president was the first president to be inaugurated in long pants? And it was very scandalous when he did. His name was Thomas Jefferson. Think about it. Jefferson had been in France. France is always the fashion leader. So he comes home in long pants, and they go, oh my God, look at that. And you say, well, what were the men wearing? Breeches. And they would have these stockings, these leggings would just come up to the knee. Look at a picture of George Washington, right? Washington would be dressed appropriately for that time, but Washington would not be wearing long pants. I mean, he would never have been in long pants. In fact, as I mentioned this before, but it's appropriate here. If you go to the rotunda of the United States Capitol, and you lay down and look at the very top of the roof up there, you'll see the painting, the Apotheosis of Washington. I'll just put up George here. Apotheosis. To become Theo, a god. There he is, wearing a toga, being transformed into a god. Now, think about that for a while. We were so obsessed with the idea that we're going to do what they did in the Roman Republic, that they would have the apotheosis for the Roman leaders and then later for the Roman emperors, right? Julius Caesar, apotheosis of Caesar, right? Apotheosis of Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius. Yeah, Marcus Aurelius. So the apotheosis was kind of a common thing for Rome. The Romans did it. That's what we're going to do. Now think about that in a democracy. You know, egalitarianism, everybody the same. And there's Washington being turned into a god. Well, you can say it's all metaphor. Well, all religion is metaphor. That's the whole point of religion, is you can't explain spiritual things without using metaphor. So everything in religion is metaphor. Anyway, here's Attis. I want to make sure you know that he is a god. And this may be one of the earliest examples in culture anywhere of what we would think of as pants, right? Of a male's legs being covered completely, which took a long time to get rid of that, or to develop that idea and get rid of the breeches. And I don't know if you can see this very well, but here he is now as a teenage boy. There's a couple of things I want you to note. First of all, he has a pointed hat. Now, pointed hats are important to understand. In Roman nomenclature or iconography, a pointed hat means Eastern, from the East, a god from the East, right? So he's already being deified here, right? And he's got his wings, so there's an association here with Cupid, the son of Venus, right? And then, this is really puzzling to me, he's wearing what look like high heels to raise him up, make him look taller. And he goes around and does the bidding of his mother, right? That's just amazing. All right, here we go. Now we come to the heart of it. This is so stunning that it'll take you a while to absorb all of this. But please, I'll go slow and I'm going to try to explain it. When Attis gets to be 18, 20 years old, he does what a lot of young boys do. He falls in love with a girl. Well, normally everybody would say, well, it's about that time in life you should get interested in girls. But not Sybil. She can't handle it. Because, remember, she and her son are an item. In some traditions, some versions of this, they've been lovers. Could be. I mean, although he's mother, she's mother, it's, you know, adopted son and all that. But anyway, she said, I'm not gonna have that. I'm going to put a spell over my son, and I am going to cause him to forget all about the girl and become madly in love with me. Okay? So far, you got it, think? So, it works. He forgets about the girl, but he becomes so madly in love with his mother that he decides to become a priest, or technically a priestess, of his mother's religion. In other words, his mother was already worshipped by some people, and so he goes out and finds a pine tree. Pine tree is very important here. And he castrates himself. Takes out his Bowie knife and does the job. But this is a very dangerous thing to do. And he bleeds to death. Well, there he is. By the way, his pointed hat kind of flopped over because they weren't really good at building hats that were very strong. And so it flops. So you often see it. You also see what looks like wings is not wings. It's an aegis. But the reason this is important, this is what in English be called a cape, aegis. Have you heard the expression under the aegis of? In other words, under the cape, under the power of so-and-so. Donald Curtis would always wear an aegis when he preached. Not always, but most of the time. And it means it's kind of a sign of divinity, right? So there he dies, and under the pine tree. The mother learns of this, and she is devastated. I didn't intend this. Unintended consequences. And so what she does is she, if I can get this to work, I'm so hopeful that I can. Here we go. She resurrects him from the dead on the third day.
Oh.
Now, here is Addis, boy or girl. See? Looks very feminine. The rays coming out indicate divinity. Here, she has her arm on top of somebody. Now, if I had time, I'd go back and show you who this is, but I'm going to tell you. This is Hades. Because what this means is she has conquered Hades, or to put it in terms, take the metaphor and turn it into normal terms. She has conquered death. She has been risen from the dead. And she is holding, this is symbolic here. We're going to see this again. The symbolic of his maleness, his private parts. He's holding. And the only thing that's unusual about this, well, first of all, he's opened up so that you can see that he is now a she, right? The only thing that's odd about it is the size of the feet, for a woman. And there's some other things here that you can read, but the essence of this is that they had, then the followers of Sybil, these Romans, who freely choose a religion, right? In other words, as long as they're willing to pay allegiance to the emperor, they can worship whoever they want. This became the oldest, the most important, the best known of all the mystery religion was the cult of Sybil and Addis. The emphasis is always on Sybil, though. And so he's now in heaven, and he's on the right hand of his mother, ruling. Yes, ma'am?
Well, is that Sybil or Addis?
No, this is Addis, in other words, no longer a man, but becoming a woman. So Addis, we still call him Addis. So the nomenclature gets hard here because, male, female. I have this problem now with students in class. A girl comes up to me this year and says, I'm Felicity. Oh, nice to meet you, Felicity. Call me Leo. That kind of thing. So this is a problem referring. It's Addis, but Addis now in feminine form, who has sacrificed his all, literally, for his mother. And he gets rewarded he rules in heaven with her. Right? Now, what is so astonishing is then the way that they would practice this religion. So every year in March or April, they'd have the Day of Blood. I think it was about the 24th of March, the Day of Blood. Now during the Day of Blood, here's what they did. They would have a pit, and over the pit, they would put planks, and then with holes in it. And on top of the pit here, they would bring a bull. Again, sacrifice a bull, just like we saw in the Cult of Dionysus. Only in this case, they slit the throat of the bull. The bull pumps out its own blood, and the men are down here being soaked in the blood of the bull. And it's at that moment that they castrate themselves so that they can become the priests or priestesses of Sybil. They're called Galli, or singular Gaulis. So there are men that have given up their sexuality to devote their lives.
And that's bull's blood?
Huh? Yeah, bull's blood is...
Like a special bull?
Well, I'm sure it was, and that it was selected for certain features, whatever. But the point is, they do this every year in commemoration of Attis's giving up his sexuality for his mother. All right? I know, it's like, do I have to look? Right. And so then they go through the whole week. One of the biggest parts of this is they have a group called the tree bearers. So what they would do is, in preparation for the resurrection, is they would go out. They had raised a forest of pine trees. Yeah, and then they're growing, and then they go and they cut some of them and they carry them into town. That's why they're called tree bearers. And they take them into the temples, into certain homes, and set them up, and guess what? Decorate them with the iconic items associated with religion, right? So little effigies of Sybil and an Attis. And the thing that always shocks my students more than anything, they'll remember this 25 years later. They don't remember what class they're in. Is when I tell them that they put the balls, the venerated object of Attis on the tree. And that putting balls on the tree has just lasted down through the years. And still we have, because the Christmas tree has absolutely nothing to do with Christianity, right? It all goes back to pagan times. And it's this idea of venerating the sacrifice of Attis in the home. So they put up granary. I mean, it's a celebration, because what it's leading up to is the Hilaria. The Hilaria is, we have a word in English, hilarious, right? Mm-hmm. Time of joy, a great joy, because on the Hilaria, Attis is raised from the dead and goes to be with his mother. And all that blood is shed then, and all those trees cut. And then the Hilaria is a day of celebration, is a day when everybody enjoys what all this means. Now, what's surprising is, just like a lot of non-Christians celebrate Christmas, a lot of Romans would celebrate the Hilaria. Good. Holiday, right? Joyous, gift-giving, banquets, food. And so it goes. Let me show you something else here. And we're almost, I hate to waste so much time looking for this little teeny missing. Here it is. There we go. Come on. You can't see this very well, but it's a platter, and it shows Sybil and his mother, and his son, ascending into heaven on a chariot. And here we have, something that I think you'd find interesting. L. Cornelius Scipio gave a Torabolium, T-A, this is U-R-O, Torabolium, sacrificed a bull and a Creo-I-B-O, a ram, to the god Sybil and Attis. And it was such a big deal, put up a plaque. Here's Sybil in her chariot with her lions. Here is Attis under the pine tree. And you see the crisscross work here and so on. Now, why was this a big deal? Well, because, remember we were talking about the Sibylline books? So Hannibal was marching on Rome. And the Romans were desperate because Hannibal had defeated 2 Roman armies. And there wasn't a whole lot that was keeping him from coming into Rome. And so, let's see if I can find this again. I can't find it again, so I'm just going to write this again. Sibylline books. Then they go and consult the Sibylline books and they say, read the books, and what does it say? The book says, this is 204 BC, to give you an idea. 200 years before the time of Christ. It says, bring the mother home. Right? Remember, this is written by Sybil. Did it occur to you yet that the word Sybil and Sibylle, see, Sibylle was a Sybil also. And so they said, bring the mother home. And so they go all the way over. They send a ship all the way over to what is today Turkey. They go to her temple, and she's worshipped there as a meteorite. And they take that rock, and they build a statue for her. They put her in her own temple on the Palatine Hill, which is the second most important hill in Rome. And there they came and worshipped her. And as soon as she arrived in the year 204, Hannibal's threat just went, and Hannibal was never a threat again to Rome. And so Scipio, it was his father or uncle, I can't remember which, who eventually defeated Hannibal. And so they became great devotees of...
What year is this plaque?
Yeah, but, well, you could, if you could read your Roman numerals, they're somewhere here. I think it's probably...
Contemporaneous?
Yeah, a few, 20, 30, 40 years later.
Oh, yeah, after the victory.
Yeah, because the victory has taken place. All right, here we go. MDM, remember I said MDM? Mater Deum Magnum, et means and, Atidi, we pronounce that Attis. Cornelius Scipio made another offering, and again, he did this a number of times. But it's so important that it's memorialized in these plaques. Oh, I hate it when this happens. It skips over. Please be patient with me. Help me find that. I'm doing what I can. It's way up here somewhere. See, it gets, there we go. If I can just get it. See, come on. Yeah. I'm going to have to, I wanted to show you something really interesting. One of these, a gallus, an arc gallus, meaning a head follower. This is a man who castrated himself and became a woman. But the one before this is the one I want to show you, and I'm
It was
bound
a little old to be
Well, this is probably, in old age.
Oh.
He had probably spent his life devoted to her. I think young men are the ones that did the castrating. Very idealistic young men. Well, there we go. Oh, you saw it, okay.
Yeah.
All right, now we have to go back over here and get it to go one spot. There we go. Now, I want to show you this. You'll see in just a minute. Come on, come on, come on. All right. This is a man who became a woman. And what I want to show you here, these are the symbols associated with Sybil, the tambourine, a flute, and a horn. They make a lot of joyful noise. They go through the streets, they dance. If you went down to a Hare Krishna meeting with me on Sunday, this is exactly what you'd see. Or for that matter, go to a Pentecostal meeting, right? Well, anyway, it has this little basket here, carrying his private parts that he has sacrificed for the mother goddess. There. And it looks very much like a pine cone, so it might be symbolic. And this looks very much like a pomegranate. Pomegranate is always a symbol for, male fertility. But look at the face. Look at the face. Look at the kind of seriousness of it, the sadness of it, right? He's all decked out, but doesn't seem particularly happy.
How about the badge sort of thing at the breast?
Yeah, let's see. It looks to me like a crescent moon, but which would be appropriate, the mother goddess.
A
You mean right here?
little bit lower.
Like a pendant.
Right here.
Looks like a Toll House cookie.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. And I tried to find out this one here. This is, it's hard to get interpretations of this. This could be a number of things, but it might be an ink where they write down, the sacred words
Oh, yeah.
that come.
How about the, over in the right hand above, would that be
Yeah.
rosemary?
This, it could be, it could also be wheat. In other words, this idea of the fertility. So what happens? Sybil becomes the goddess Demeter and our Ceres, and becomes this goddess of creativity. In other words, she absorbs all the traits of all these gods and goddesses.
Oh, unified into,
yeah, and
like Christianity,
yeah,
three
yeah,
guys in one?
Yeah,
This
sort
is
of like that, or in this case,
multiplicity?
maybe 10 gods in one. But
Uh-huh.
the point is, if you think about it, it's a monotheism thing. It's a kind of monotheism.
Yeah.
All right, now, sorry, Carolyn, run over. I know you're going to run me over, right? Yeah. So I am going to next week talk to you about Mithraism, which is another one of these that we know so little about, but there's certain things we can ascertain. And the Isis cult, the cult of Isis. We started, I think, in the beginning talking about Isis. Well, Isis kind of swings back around now, becomes a Roman cult, right? And a very, very important one. There were many cults that we won't talk about, like the cult of Orpheus. Although a lot of, Orpheus was a god of music, so a lot of music houses were called Orpheum, the Temple of Orpheus. And you'll see this, around even today. Some of the bigger cities have an Orpheum. Yes, go ahead.
I just had one question.
Yeah.
So you're explaining how this has moved to where we are now. Did it move to Eastern? I mean, are you going to see this all around the world, this same?
No, and the reason is because the Romans were unique in the ancient world. Most countries, you were born in that country, you were of that religion. So when Islam came along and conquered, with only a few exceptions, you became Islamic. If you were in Japan, for example, you were Shinto and then Buddhist, and the Shinto Buddhism kind of had a shotgun wedding and were kind of forced together. But in the end, it's always about the Romans were unique in their willingness to let other religions and cultures come in. And this explains, to a large extent, Roman success, because rather than suppress these things and cause endless rebellion, the only group they couldn't really suppress totally, that they couldn't allow totally, were the Jews. And because the Jews would never show allegiance to the emperor. And so there was conflict always, very often with the Jews, and of course Christianity rolls out of that. But anyway, there's lots and lots to talk about, and I want to leave some time next week so we can kind of piece all this together. But tonight I was trying to show you that many of our customs are buried in antiquity. Like, why do we put greenery up at Christmas time? Well, there's a long tradition of this, you see. And then if people like the idea, then it just travels around the world. And so you can go on Christmas Eve, you can go to Tokyo and people will be buying Christmas gifts, and not one of them are Christian. See? I mean, it's the power of culture. Culture is the strongest thing. You can't really legislate anything. If you want something done, you have to change the culture. And that's very difficult.
Yeah.
Well, it's so much fun.
Yeah.
It's festive,
Yeah.
and we have fun.
Yeah. If it's anything that you can turn into fun, if you want people to change their behavior, you make it fun somehow.
Yeah.
And you incentivize it, and then all of a sudden it takes on its own momentum, right? And then once that momentum is rolling, then you can stand back and watch it go. But getting started, that's the trick.
I'd like to share one quick thing,
Yeah.
because I'm going back to the water and the wine.
Yeah.
When I lived in France, we lived in the Low Pyrenees.
Yes.
The only person I've ever seen constantly diluting their wine, about 50%,
Yeah.
was the wife of the director of that oil company.
Ah.
And we had lunches or dinners a number of times.
Yeah.
She always diluted her wine 50%.
Yeah.
I had no idea that it had any.
Right, and most people would not show it. In other words, they'll do it back in the kitchen and you wouldn't realize it's diluted unless you're paying a lot of attention, right?
And it was just matter of fact,
Yeah.
no explanation, it's just that's the way I drink
Well,
wine.
and so they drink gallons and gallons of wine and never get drunk. And we drink one bottle and, we're gone, right? It's because it's still, even today, being diluted to a certain extent. Okay, hope you can come for the big finale next Tuesday. We ought to get into some good stuff. And hang around if you have any questions. Thank you so much.